Good evening.
Good evening, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. And how are you?
I'm doing well. Greeting to
Bukhoy.
everyone. Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Can we just give it 5 more minutes for the people to come in, then we can start? Um, Let me take this opportunity and greet you all in the wonderful name of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. My name is Bukosi for those that have not. Those who are coming for the first time to this platform. Um, Our platform is very simple, and our aims are very simple and straightforward. It is for the education of the nation, uplifting of humanity, trying to understand the world that we live in, and also trying to find out exactly what is the purpose of our existence and what is it that we ought to contribute in the world in which we live in. That is why you have noticed, for those that have been with us ever since we have started, that we deal with different subjects from health to social issues. And today we are going to be looking at a special subject, which is climate change. I know that there are not many platforms that discuss such a subject, but in consideration with the team, we realize that it's one of those subjects that needs to be discussed so that at least people can be aware of what is happening around them and probably see where do they fit in within the context of the current happenings of our planet. I believe that there is a certain level of stewardship on every living being. That is why we thought it necessary to actually get a specialist who can help us unpack the subject and understand what it is. We hope that with these discussions, as they're going to be put online, they will help as many people as we possibly can in trying to get them to understand what is climate change, what is it that causes climate change, and what can be done with that. I'm not sure whether it can be stopped or it can be delayed. This is what we are here for, to get an understanding. We have brother, here's the name right now, Mzugisi. Mzugisi. I would not want to fail to introduce him accordingly, so I would ask him to open his mic and unmute himself so that at least he can introduce himself properly. And then after that, I will have a word of prayer, and then we can get to the subject matter.
Good evening. I'm going to open my mic. I've been scrambling across trying to get myself set up. I've been using two computers, so I realized that the other one was not doing the things I thought I wanted to do. So, and the one I just took now is the battery was running low. So, but I should be sorted now. I'm trying to open my camera for whatever reason. There it is. So
There you go.
So it works. So I've just had even a makeshift sitting arrangement here. So I hope you can see me quite well. Just to make a point that I'm a real person. So my name is Mzugisi Gwata. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Brother Mzugisi. We really appreciate your time, and we hope to learn more from you. But before we get to the subject matter of the day, I would ask Brother Mpo to pray for us.
Our Heavenly Father, we want to say thank you, Lord Father, for this opportunity and privilege to come together as to discuss this wonderful subject. We invite your Holy Spirit, for God, because all knowledge and wisdom comes from you, for God. Every growth springs from above. Hence, for God, may it be you who teach us unto all truth. Be with your servants in the sharing of these beautiful messages, for God. In everything, may it be for your name to be glorified. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thank you very much, Brother Mpo. Yes. So this is how the program is going to run. We will allow Brother Mzugisi to give the presentation. Then at the end, we will have a session of questions and answer session, so that at least if there be any question that you want to, or anything that you want him to clarify, you can get that opportunity to engage him on the subject matter. Having said that, I would hand over to Brother Mzugisi.
Thank you very much, because as I said, my name is Mzugisi Gwata. I am I'd like to believe, a climate change practitioner. I've been at this thing for the last, I think, 15 years, if not more. I started actually my career as a meteorologist at the South African Weather Service. So you probably might pick that up when I do the presentation. Um, so, but for the last 15 years, since 2010, I've been working for the city of Johannesburg as a, if you like, urban sort of climate change practitioner. So I don't usually see myself as an expert, but just, a typical practitioner. I'm going to try and share. Ordinarily, I use Zoom at work. Not Zoom. I usually use Teams. So I'm going to see whether this.
I think he's disconnected. Okay, we'll try to get him back in.
Yeah, let me just check him. I think he's trying to connect the slides. Maybe let me get him in, then you can assist him.
I am back. Sorry, colleagues. It turns out I had not I had not plugged my, even though I had put on the charging and things, I had not plugged the plug on. So I was always running on low battery. So I'm back again. Hopefully everybody can hear me. So I was trying to put up the presentation itself. You will also tell me when you can see it so that I think it's up now. So
Yes, we can see it.
Excellent.
Yes,
Yeah,
beautiful.
there's quite a bit of ground to cover in this. The way I had prepared this, it's because I'm trying to talk to an audience to whom I'm not sure exactly as to where it is in terms of this subject called climate change. But I'm going to try and, if you like, maybe start from the beginning and and maybe not do climate change 101, but maybe try to see to what extent I can make it relatable. We will see at the end whether I've been successful in my attempt. But in the main, really, I'll try and bring in, the science of climate change, the politics of climate change, and because I'm speaking to a religious community, I'll sort of try and bring in, some interesting aspects that, have in recent years have come from the religious community and climate change. And maybe also what we can do as individuals as well when it comes to climate change. So basically, I think that's the thrust of this talk this evening. There will be graphs, there will be, but the intention really is not to zoom into these graphs. I don't think we are in a lecture here, but more of a discussion. I'm using some of these as also my points to talk to, but I've tried as well to bring in some text so that we can try and follow what's going on. With this, I thought it's probably more like the beginning. You have the sun, and then you have got the earth. These are sort of two relatable things that we all know. We are on earth, and we are always seeing the sun all the time. So in reality, there are interactions between the sun and the earth. So the sun beams its energy, solar radiation onto the earth. That energy is absorbed by the earth in various ways. The oceans absorb the earth, the forests and the like. But some of this energy gets back into space. The There are also gases in our atmosphere which are occurring, and these are occurring naturally. So basically, what I'm explaining here is the kind of thing that happens naturally. Nobody has had any hand into this system that I'm explaining. It happens naturally, and these gases, are absorbing and also releasing some of this energy from the sun into the atmosphere. All of this they do so that we can have, as human beings and all living things on Earth, can have what we call sort of a habitable climate, temperature that we can all, enjoy, so that we can live in it. It's, as I said, it's all natural. And I'm gonna sort of try and make a link now to how then, human beings are tampering basically with this, if you like, system that, the Earth, if you like, God has given us, so we are now, as human beings, tampering with this system. And I think, if you like, that's where then you would start to see, as it were, the beginning of changing the climate, because we are now tampering with this system. Where are we tampering with this system? We are tampering with this system when it comes to the gases. If you see bullet point number 3, we are not touching the sun. There's nothing we can do with it, but we are tampering with this system through the gases, the carbon dioxide, methane, and other gases that we as human beings, through various means. I'm gonna speak about that further down. But as I said, this system is natural, so it's meant to make life habitable for all living things on Earth. Then you may have heard of something called the Industrial Revolution, which happened in the 1800s. What was it? It was a move away from agrarian economies. People were now stopping using agriculture in sort of, if you like, primitive forms of using a hand tools to till the land, so that people could eat in sort of small families and the like, into industrial scale activities where we produce machines and manufacturing in large scale, and then we produce transportation, the steam engines and the like. And this industrial revolution is understood to have started in Europe, in particular in Britain. If you recall, British was an empire, owning almost all of the world. So all of this thing started there. So, the development, as it were, of Europe and Northern Europe is as a result of this industrial revolution, which happened in the 1800s. Now, I said in the previous slide, this is now where we are beginning to tamper with the gases, because this process of industrialization through machinery, large-scale manufacturing, the production of transportation, trains and the like, was fueled by coal. The coal that we have here in South Africa to drive our energy or electricity, the use of oil to drive our cars, and natural gas to cook in our homes, and other forms of energy. So this is now where we start to tamper with the natural system of greenhouse effect by adding more gases into the atmosphere. Then by doing so, then we're changing the, if you like, the chemistry of the Earth. And then we start to change the way the climate of the world behaves. And we're going to see how that, this industrial revolution has had an impact into how the climate of the world has tended to, to come about today. But there was a scientist from Sweden, Svante Arrhenius. It turns out actually that he had seen this thing even during the time it was happening, or during the industrial revolution. He was actually he was a chemist, so he did experiments where he was making the connection between the emission or the release of the carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, and linking that into, the carbon dioxide having an impact on the increase of the of global temperature. That was like 100 years ago already. So it of course, he was one of the few during this time who knew of this. But as you can imagine, he was probably, as I'm saying, the one of the few and maybe the only one who was talking about this at the time. And the scientific community of that time may not have been alive to this, to this idea. But it's good to put it on record that it's not only now that we actually get to know about something called climate change. We have known about this, according to Svante Arrhenius, many years for over 100 years ago. I think he received a Nobel Peace Award, not so much for that, but for other things that he had done for chemistry. And Sweden, his home country, is actually quite it's quite interesting when we're going to look into the next slides, because the northern European countries like Sweden, and even most of those countries of the Scandinavia up to today, they're actually quite very strong on environmental stewardship and in particular climate change. So they look very well after the environment, and as a result, in terms of their development standards, according to how the UN judges the world or categorizes countries, they are one of the top, countries in terms of development, well-being, and people being happy to live in environment that is, clean, as it were. I've just mentioned as Arrhenius as coming from Sweden. Again, in 1972, of course, many years later. And this was actually not the first conference on environment. There were others, but they were sort of, happening in small spaces. The 1972, Stockholm conference was actually quite pivotal in the sense that it brought so many countries into one place and focused their attention into environmental issues. Often, as I was saying, conferences would be, or at least environmental conferences would be quite small and not so much far-reaching in terms of involving many countries. So this one was really, interesting in the sense that it brought so many countries involved. You may have heard, for example, of some of these conferences that sort of followed this, talking about the idea of sustainable development, something that we're still talking about it today, where the resources that we must use now must be such that we harness them for the future generation. So these conferences were talking about this and sort of putting environment into the center. And key to this conference in Stockholm was the formation of the United Nations Environmental Program. You're going to see the UNEP involvement in the work of environment further down, also in other conferences and other important institutions that became and that have become actually key to the work of climate change even to this day. So many of these countries involved, the ideas of environmental justice were already talked about over 50 years ago already, sovereignty and shared responsibility. So countries have actually been talking about environment, trying to see to what extent we could do something better. And then this conference in 1972 became an interesting, as it were, forerunner to the 1992 Rio Earth Summit. I don't know whether some of you were around. There was something called WSSD, the World Summit on Sustainable Development, here in Johannesburg in 2002. That conference is a sequel of this conference, 1972, and I think 20 years later, I can't remember which country it was, 20 years later or 10 years later again. So they sort of come in those 10, 20-year sort of intervals. So the WSSD, which took place here in 2002, was a sequel of these conferences on environment. So the Earth Summit, the Earth Summit then in Rio in 1992 is quite very important in the sense that it brought something called UNFCCC, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. I want to see what the next slide is before I could Yes, let me, yeah, I see there's UNFCCC. I thought there was. So follow with, I'm doing this, if you like, timeline of these things. There were other many things in between, to be honest with you, but I think these were actually quite topical and maybe quite maybe pointed for this discussion for today. The UNFCCC I talked about, United Framework Convention on Climate Change, was an outcome of the 1992 Rio Earth Summit. What was this? This was the first, if you like, convention, or if we use the language in the UN, they use the language of instruments. Maybe I shouldn't use that, because the instrument in the UN language means something different to what you probably would understand an instrument. So it was just a first, if you like, document that would have, start to organize nations around the fight against climate change. Of course, before people were talking in environmental terms in general, but then the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change sort of becomes that thing, or that document that links nations across the world to now start to really focus their attention to fighting climate change. You're going to see that the UNFCCC is now linked to the Conference of Parties. What you and I would understand as COPs, COP1, COP15, COP21. There will be COP30 this year in Brazil. So there's the link, therefore, between UNFCCC and COP is direct, in the sense that nations that would have ratified, there's a language of ratification in the UN language. The ratification means a country doesn't just sign, because there's a signing of a convention. A convention is that thing that sort of would make nations to be legally bound by, is if they sign and ratify. So you sign it as a nation like South Africa, but it's not the same as ratification. Ratification means it's basically the next step of signing a convention. Ratification means you are legally bound by that convention. Whatever it is that convention says within the UN system, if you've ratified it as a country, you are supposed to do what that convention says. So it's in a way, it sort of becomes part of the legal system of your country, such that if somebody else, any person, feels that a country like South Africa, for example, even though it may have ratified a UNFCCC convention, is not living up to it, probably could then take the country to court to say, but you are not living up to what you have signed up to. So this UNFCCC, therefore, it's a very live thing, even up to this day, even though it was, established in, or came as a result of the 1992 Rio Earth Summit. Of course, there were other conventions that came out of that, but they are not necessarily directly linked to climate change. But I want to speak as well about the stuff that happened in 1988 and then 1990, because they are also linked to the UNFCCC 1992 establishment. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, it's actually even it is something that is still alive up to this day. The the IPCC, we call it the IPCC. This is actually a group of scientists, and they are from all over the world. These scientists' responsibility is to assess, as you can see here, the state of climate knowledge across the world. And this was formed in 1988. Remember, it's here formed by UNEP. Remember, UNEP was established by the conference that took place in 1972. And WMO is the World Meteorological Organization. The organization, all of these things are happening within the UN, the United Nations framework. The UNEP deals with environmental issues within the UN. The World Meteorological Organization, WMO, deals with the weather issues within the the UN system. So this IPCC, was established in 1988. Then in 1990, it produced its first ever assessment report. It assessed the science that was around across the world around climate change and produced a report. It's called the first assessment. I think as of today, because as I said, IPCC is an alive thing. As of today, the IPCC is on its sixth assessment report, and it's busy with the seventh assessment report. These are very large documents which are dealing with science of climate change. Anything that you really want to know about climate change, these are those of us who are in the climate change space go to, if you like, they are sort of the holy grail of climate change globally, because this is where every scientist who is involved in the space of climate change, gets to deposit his work, or at least this work gets his work or her work gets to be noticed and brought into the spotlight. And scientists will be coming from different universities. In South Africa, usually, as of today, for example, you would find scientists from the universities that we know here in South Africa and some research institutions. I know professors from UCT, from Wits University, Stellenbosch, UKZN, some people from CSIR who would be involved in this kind of work. So it gives you a sense of, if you like, the rigor that is usually associated with these reports. Quite detailed stuff, and dense in terms of the information that you can find. It's not really hard. It is hard science. The reports themselves are written for policymakers, so that if you don't really want to delve deep into the science, you are allowed, at least there are products for you as a policymaker that you can just read and sort of get a sense of what's going on. So the 1990 report then actually, if you like, influenced the 1992 Earth Summit, so that there is an establishment of the UNFCCC, this convention which will deal with climate change, because it sort of presented to the world if you like, the dire situation of climate change. As it says there, that it provided a compelling evidence of human-induced. In other words, it showed that human beings are having an impact into the global warming. So basically the kinds of things that had happened during the Industrial Revolution have had by this time a clear signal into how the world has tended to warm up. This was by 1990 already. Remember, I said 100 years ago people had known about this and had talked about it. 1972, people trying to get the nations to talk about climate change. 1988, forming the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change to coordinate and consolidate science on climate change. Then 1990, first they produce a consolidated report on climate change, which says that indeed the human beings are having an impact on the climate, and that impact is that of warming. And the UNFCCC then gets formed, and in 1992, of course, South Africa was still an apartheid state, so it signed this thing, from what I understand, just before 1994. But as you can imagine, because we were not a democracy, it was just a signature. Usually a signature is just a signal to say you are in favor of this convention, but ratification would, as I was saying, would have meant that you would then need to do things which would be obligations associated with the convention. I think, from what I understand, we ratified the convention around 1995 or thereabout, when we became a democracy. So we took the responsibility during our democracy. The convention itself entered into force, meaning there's a threshold of countries that was required for it to become or to come into effect. So countries go and discuss in 1992 and say, let's set up this convention. But then for it to be alive or a real thing, countries must sign up and then ratify it. And how many countries? At least 50 plus. If we've got 50 plus countries, then we can say this thing is alive. Then we're gonna have those countries that have signed up then start to show an action or actions to deal with climate change. Those nations that have actually signed up, those are called parties to the convention. Hence the name Conference of Parties. When the parties meet, parties to the UNFCCC, parties to the convention meet. When they meet, that meeting is called the Conference of Parties, therefore COP. So the first COP, because this thing was approved in 1994, so or at least came into force not approved, but came into force in 1994. The first Conference of Parties, the first meeting of these countries that had signed up and ratified happened in 1995, and that would have been the first one. I said in December, November this year, we are going to be on the 30th of these meetings of parties, in other words, the countries that had signed up to this. Currently, 198 countries have signed up to the UNFCCC. Virtually, basically, all countries in the world had signed up to this convention, meaning there seems to be a consensus across the world that there must be a concerted effort to fight climate change. There isn't much disagreement about what needs to be done. Even though you may have heard, for example, at the time that Donald Trump became the president for the first time, took the United States out of the Paris Agreement. But in the main, really, all the other countries are aligned when it comes to the fight for climate change. I talked about the Conference of Parties, the parties that had signed up to the UNFCCC. You may have heard of COP. There was COP 3 in 1997 in Kyoto, Japan, which came up with something called Kyoto Protocol. And this protocol was really a tool that was decided upon by the parties that had signed up during that time, that the developed nations, Europe, America, North America, Japan, and the like, would need to, reduce their emissions by certain targets, by certain times. And they introduced things like carbon markets. I'm not going to delve deep into that. Then COP21 was in Paris. It was a one of the topical COP because it brought us what we now have currently, the Paris Agreement. The agreement was that the nations that were there, almost 198 of them, agreed that all nations on Earth must try and make sure that global temperature does not exceed 2 degrees. And they must do all they can to actually keep it as well within 1.5 degrees. Basically, that was the key goal that had agreed. So nations would agree on these grand goals in these meetings to say, let's keep the temperatures within these limits. Otherwise, if we don't, then we are risking the climate system. Risking meaning certain things might collapse. Human beings, for one, you may struggle to survive. In extreme temperatures. I was in India last year, in a country called Ahmedabad, eastern part of India, in a state called Gujarat. India is a very hot country. Not all of it, but it's a predominantly hot country. By hot, I mean 45 to 50 degree temperatures. That's quite hot for you and I. Actually, even for Indians, that's also hot. So if you add 2 degrees to typically 40 degrees, 45 degrees. You are basically going to have or end up with 47 degrees. You're going to end up in extreme cases with 52 degrees, that kind of a thing. So that's what this means. That's what these things mean. So this it appears quite small, but actually it's quite significant. It for human beings, for old people, these temperatures could be quite debilitating, then they could lead to death. The key example that I'm mentioning from this city called Ahmedabad, which we visited last year, they were actually showing us a case of an extreme heat wave that hit them in 2010. Ordinarily, they were telling us that in that city, in a given month, maybe about 100 people would die out of normal death in a given place. But during that heat wave, 300 people died in one day. So they died of heat stroke. In other words, because it's too hot, then the human body cannot cope, and then suddenly they had these spike in deaths. And in that week, because a heat wave would be something that manifests over a couple of days, 2-3 days, or 5 days or more. So during those few days of extreme heat, they had thousands of deaths within just a week. And imagine then if you're going to have these temperatures going up and because you're still going to have heat waves. So if you're always going to add, a degree or two into an already unbearable situations, that's what this means when nation says they must actually limit this thing to protect life, to protect systems, earth systems, biodiversity. We don't know what's going to happen to our oceans. We're not sure what's going to happen to Antarctic ice and in places like those. So, and then there's something that they also talked about during the Paris Agreement, which is called the nationally determined contributions. They like to use these very grand terms when in the UN system. Basically, this is a commitment that a country makes, now to try and implement the Paris Agreement. So you said you're going to try and keep the temperatures well below 2 degrees. Ideally, you want to really, be ambitious and go up to 1.5. How are you going to do that? So to be able to show how you're going to do that, then you state that in what is now called the nationally determined contributions. 2 days ago, actually, South Africa was doing consultations on this. All nations, 198 of them, will be submitting these documents to the UNFCCC. You can go if you want to read about what South Africa says, you just go to the UNFCCC website, NDC, you will see all nations what they say they will do to try and keep the temperatures below 2 degrees and 1.5. There are other people elsewhere who are doing research on this. I'll show you further down exactly as to what is the state of these nationally determined contributions in respect or in response to this commitment of keeping things below 2 degrees and 1.5. And you will see actually that what we say we are going to do versus what we sort of put as a grand promise versus what we are actually doing to keep up to that chalk and cheese. And then we had COP27 in Egypt. Not much came out of that except the loss and damage fund. This is money that will be coming from developed countries going into developing and least developed countries to try and help them to deal with the impacts of climate change. When the climate has changed, there are debilitating droughts, there are floods. Some countries don't have the money to keep them going. A country like Mozambique, it gets hit by hurricanes or tropical cyclone on a yearly basis. It's a least developed country. So if its infrastructure every year gets swept away by a tropical cyclone, that country is poor. It's not able to keep up with the damage. Unlike, for example, a country like Japan, which sits in tectonic, on tectonic plates that can be at any given time, they can have earthquakes. That country can withstand those things. It doesn't mean that it doesn't have fatalities, but that country does not collapse as a result of those things. It has built-in systems that it then is able to survive, and life continues, a few days after the event. COP28, it happened in Dubai. Nothing much in that COP, and then there's a COP coming again in this year. So these COPs actually are happening every year. So each and every year there's a COP, and countries are then discussing as to how far and what else still needs to be done. So, coming all the way from the UNFCCC, 1992, it coming into force into 1994, and then it's starting its meeting in 1995, and then nations, talking and talking and talking up to today. I was giving you so much of, I'm going to change tech a bit. How much time have I still got? I think I've got 15 minutes. I should be able to cover this. So I'm changing tech a bit now, because what I was sort of talking about was the beginning of of the greenhouse effect, things happening naturally, and then you have an industrial revolution which sort of tinkers now with that free natural thing, the addition of gases into the atmosphere, nations looking into this and realizing that there is a problem here. So they come together and find ways of fighting this, and then they produce a convention in 1992, the UNFCCC, and all nations suddenly are aligned. They are in agreement to this thing. They are meeting, they are talking almost every year to try and see what they can do. Now I'm going to try and present some graphs, and see, what that rhetoric from countries, whether it mirrors what we are seeing on the ground. In the world, there's what we call the global observation system. So, the science, we talked about, of course, in the beginning. It's anchored on observation. What are we observing? So, there are weather stations on the ground, and there are satellites in the atmosphere that are looking down on Earth. There are measurements, there are ships that are moving up and down that are actually having measurements. So there's quite a lot of things that are being measured in the atmosphere, both at sea and on land, and also in the vertical in the atmosphere as we go up. This is all to try and make sense of this weather and climate that we're experiencing over time. And currently, there are also attempts to project as to what is going to be expected into the future based on these observations that have been collected. So on the right panel, you've got the sort of idealized picture of observations globally. Then on the left panel here, I'm showing you what actually is the real situation on the ground in South Africa. You may not have known this, but these little dots that you see on the map are real things that are on the ground to observe the climate and the weather of South Africa. So rainfall, temperature, and air quality, and things like that. Lightning as well. It's being observed. So all of these things on the left panel are done by the South African Weather Service. Virtually all nations in the world have similar things, but it will differ from one country to another depending on the sophistication of that country and its ability to fund this kind of architecture and infrastructure, because it's quite expensive to run and maintain. But it's key to note that there is this kind of thing that's happening. So people are observing this and are recording it, and they're keeping it for understanding the weather previously, the weather now, and the weather weather or climate going into the future. Based on these observations, therefore, then we're not going to go deep into this graph, but I think the picture that I want you to see is that things are actually increasing. So from the 1960s, 70s, you see where the temperature is sort of, this is the change in the temperature and not so much the temperature itself. So the change, it's about, globally, this is the global picture, a very generalized picture of what's happening globally. So in the 1960s, 70s, the change was around, from between 0 and 0.5. And as you move with the years up to 2024, you would see that actually the change, is about 1.5. Remember, the Paris Agreement had said the temperature should actually not exceed 2 degrees, and nations should try by all means to keep it below 1.5. But what has happened in 2024? We've actually reached that 1.5. So this is the global picture. So basically, what the nations had said in Paris is not in line with what's actually happening on the ground. So the temperatures are actually going up and not going down. So we are still emitting gases into the atmosphere. We are not helping the situation. This is a picture for South Africa. That the picture I'd given previously. This is a global picture. This is a picture for South Africa. In South Africa, the picture is the same. We are increasing our temperatures. It's still sitting at just about less than 1 degrees. This is also a generalized picture across, the stations. Remember those stations I showed you in the 2 slides ago. This is the data that would have been taken from some of them to give us a sense of what's going on with our climate. You can see it's actually from 1951. So that's how far back. There are actually other stations that go even longer than this. So you could see that it used to be cooler in the past. Temperatures were, this blue means that it was cool. The red means it's actually getting hotter. So for the most part in this record, things were actually quite cooler. Then you started to see things starting to change, in the beginning of the 90s. And then before you know it, from the beginning of the 2010s, we have never looked back. It has sort of become hotter and hotter and hotter and hotter throughout. So basically the story is that it's becoming warm, and the warming is not abating globally, and that story is also obtaining here in South Africa. Here, we're not going to delve deeper into this. What has tended to happen in climate change in general is that we know for a fact that the temperatures are increasing. As I've shown you in the last 2 graphs, it's very clear. There's no doubt about it. However, when it comes to rainfall, the story is not very clear. This is actually the rainfall of Gauteng province from 1921 until today, 2024, I think 2024, 25. 1921 up to 1924. So the picture here, you've got these bars going up and down, going up and down without a real clearly, whether things are going down forever or going up forever. Sometimes they're up, sometimes they're down. So this is the picture of rainfall generally globally. It doesn't seem to be giving us a sense of whether it's going down or going up. But what is usually said, and I think it's something that I myself need to still figure out or sort of get a sense. I've not seen any interesting studies. The understanding is that going into the future, rainfall, because of climate change, or because of the change in climate, rainfall as we know it here in Gauteng and many other parts of the country and the world is likely to become stronger. And as well as, the storms are likely to become frequent. Frequent meaning, let's say in a given summer period, you could have, frequent storms which are quite violent. But they, in the main, do not change the totality of the rainfall in a given year. As you could see here, here you are just getting a sense of total rainfall on a given year. And you are not seeing whether that in that given year there were very violent storms or this or the other. So that's the picture when it comes to rainfall. Here, really, I'm just trying to, if you like, reinforce the idea. I've moved quickly from rainfall back to temperature. This is coming from the remember I talked about the IPCC right at the beginning, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. This is their recent report, the 6th assessment. Their first assessment was in 1990. This is the 6th assessment, I think, which came out about 2 years ago. So in this report, they're saying, the bars in this graph, the blue would mean when the world was cooler, 1900s. Then the red, as you move towards your right, is the years that we're living in, and then into the future. As you can see, the bars are changing in color from blue to orange to red. So, and examples of, people born in 1980, people born, in the 2020s. So it means, just in simple terms, if you were born like myself in the 1970s, it was quite a sort of cool-ish time. My child is born in the beginning of the 2000s, so he's actually born in a very hot world. If your child is not yet born, so that child is going to be born in an even hotter world. 2020 beyond, it's a completely different world. It's going to be a world which is actually very hot and going into the future. Here you've got what we call future scenarios. The future scenarios are what you try and imagine the future where you reduce greenhouse gas emissions. In other words, you try to do everything that you can, to not put gases into the atmosphere. Still, because of the historical things you have done, you've basically committed the earth to warming. So you're going to have to do quite a lot of stuff to try and change the situation as things stand. So I think the picture here is that of gloom, really, because we have done the things in the past, and those things that we've done in the past, the earth has recorded them. And basically the atmosphere has recorded them, and it's bringing them back to us in the form of extreme heat. So we are really, we're really stuck in this situation. We're going to have to do something quite drastic, not just the country, but all of those 198 countries that are part of this UNFCCC. Remember, I said they do what we call nationally determined contributions, the NDC. They agreed upon these things in Paris during COP21. This orange thing here is what these plans that nations have said they would that communicated their actions in to say, okay, country X, our NDC, our actions are going to be from now, meaning from 2015 until 2100. To limit to 2 degrees, however, it goes down the green line. And to limit according to 1.5, it goes down the blue line. We are actually moving in the red or sort of orange-ish pink line. So we are basically, by we, I mean the whole globe. We are not in line with what we said we are going to do. So the pink line would have to bend even further downwards to go to where the 2 degree is, to where the 1.5 limit is. This is also coming from the IPCC recent report, which came out, as I said, 2 years ago. So this is the state of affairs as we speak right now. We are not meeting the commitments that we said we are going to meet to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. So we are still going to hit the world, basically. Now I'm closer to closing. There is in addition to those NDCs that I talked about, in South Africa, we've got what now we call the Climate Change Act. There's a lot of excitement about this thing in South Africa because it's the first of its kind. It's now going to try and compel it compels all spheres of government, from national to provincial to local, to really, do something about climate change if they were not already. I know where I work, we've been doing some work on climate change, so this doesn't come as a surprise to us. But I think it's worth putting out there that there's something like this, so that you can know about that South Africa actually is doing a lot of work when it comes to climate change. Since I'm speaking to a religious group, I thought I should bring this to your attention as well. I recall actually in 2015 there was this. I'm not sure whether I would be, pronouncing this quite correctly, Laudato Si, which was a letter which was quite prominent at the time from the Catholic Church, and these letters, and there's another one that came in 2023, and some action which also took place in 2025. So basically, you can see here that the Catholic Church has sort of played an important role to galvanize a leadership, not just across the religious community, but across spheres to get the action to move in line with what nations had agreed upon. So, and then recently there has been something called the Interfaith Engagement at COP. So at these COPs I'd mentioned previously, the first of its kind obviously was the Dubai one, where there was this a coalition of of faith organizations, all trying to deal as well with climate change. The Talanoa Dialogues. I think the Talanoa Dialogues came, from one of the and my son is coming in. I think it's his time, this, but I'm about to finish. And then you had the African Faith Leaders Head of also. This is something that's coming in the COP in Brazil this year. So I think this is just to give a sense of the religious community being involved as well in this space. This is my penultimate slide. I'm not sure whether it's going to work, this slide, but really it shows what the global world is doing when it comes to funding, because we have to do something. One of the things, I think I didn't mention this, is that developed nations, countries which are advanced, one of the things that is in the convention that was agreed in 1992 is that there was what is called means of implementation. Basically, that means money or funding that can be made available to countries that can't afford to then, change their systems. In the case of South Africa, we are saying we need to change our energy system so that it does not pollute and contribute to greenhouse gas emissions. So how do you do that? You need money. You need money. You need money to do so. Where do you get the money? So countries like the developed countries then can make that money available, to these countries. So this slide here, if things are moving from left to right. So the blue means money that comes from public funds from the developed countries, and the orange is from private. Also, this is money coming from developed countries, from public governments and other associated organizations and organizations that are private from the developed countries. And they use different kinds of instruments to make this money available. It could be in the form of grants, it could be in the form of debt, equity, etc., etc. What are they funding? They are funding what is called adaptation, or they are funding what is called mitigation, or both. What is adaptation? Adaptation are those things that you do to now deal with the eventuality of climate change. There's nothing you can do about reversing it, at least right now. It's going to be too hot. So you're going to be facing extreme heat. You're going to be facing heat waves. You're going to be facing floods. You're going to be facing droughts. So, but you don't have the money to be dealing with all these things. So to then deal with these things I've just mentioned, heat waves, droughts, flood, that kind of thing that you do, it's called adaptation. You are adapting to a situation that you have nothing, you can do nothing about. you are just going to get it. So you must just adapt to it. Mitigation, on the other hand, are those actions that you do to then reduce the emission of greenhouse gas emissions. If you close down a power station, like a coal power station, it would mean that there will be no emission of carbon dioxide at that point. That action would mean you are no longer emitting, so it would be called mitigation. So you are now reducing if let's say you change to solar or you change to wind, then that action is called mitigation. As you can see, the money is going mostly to East Asia. It's going to Western Europe still. It's going to US and Canada. They're actually paying themselves, these developed countries. It's also very small amount of money is going to sub-Saharan Africa, meaning the whole of Africa really as a whole. There's little money coming here and as you may have heard, the African continent, or sub-Saharan Africa, as it were, is the most vulnerable, and is the most exposed to this. Although we are actually not the ones who were responsible. I have not included here a graph. Maybe it's just my mistake to show what's the state of greenhouse gas emissions across different parts of the world between developing and developed countries. But you will see actually that China, you will see that the USA, you will see that the UN, not the UN, the European Union as a whole, Germany and countries like that are actually quite very high. And yet countries like us and most of the African continent emit close to really nothing. So I think this is my last slide. So what can we do as individuals? Of course, we can try and use renewable energy, solar, wind. In any case, electricity is expensive. It would make sense, I think, to change your system in your house and just use solar energy. Try walking, for public transport, try cycling, try using public transport, electric vehicles are not the thing yet in South Africa, but I think they are coming. I've seen lots of charging stations across various points in the province. Well, avoid unnecessary air travel. We like flying, but if it's possible, these are things that we can avoid. These are things that are at an individual and at the choices that we can make: buy less, buy better, choose durable goods, recycle, reuse, use circular economy brands, things that can be, that are not easily, thrown away just like that to contribute to waste. Waste actually contributes to methane. And methane gas, because if we throw it into the landfill side, it causes a lot of methane gas, and methane gas is more potent than carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas emissions. It causes more warming actually. There are things that we can do. There's a lot of this actually within the climate space already. The COPs I've mentioned, it gets quite noisy because of the civic and community engagement. So these faith-based organizations getting involved in the space. At the NDC consultation I attended about 2 days ago in Sandton, organized by Department of Environmental Affairs, there were actually faith-based organizations there that were making inputs into South African NDC, basically saying we need from the faith organizations more ambition from the country to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and do something good about the earth. As I said, Atusi, that I'm hoping that what I planned to achieve at the beginning, I had been able to do so by now. But you will then tell me. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Brother Mzogisi. I think before we open to everyone, I really appreciate the presentation. At least it gives a clear picture of where we are and what is the world doing about that. But there are a number of questions that I would want to ask. From what you've just presented, looking at the fact that from the presentation, I noticed that this global warming seems to be happening across the world. So I wanted to know, looking at the countries like mainly in African countries, which are not as developed as other countries, what is it that causes them also to have the same challenge like the developed countries? I can imagine countries like China, because of the amount of pollution that is taking place that side, really you can understand why they're in that condition. But you're thinking of a country like Malawi, like Mozambique, those are the poor countries. How is it that they also suffer the same conditions like the developed countries?
We are all living in the same
House.
weather sort of we're all living in the same. There was actually an interesting I saw this, was it last night or 2 nights ago? There's an interesting research institute organization in Europe. It's called Copernicus. It's basically a European funded organization, very well resourced, and it does the research for Europe, and of course for the globe as well. They were showing I'm going to answer the question, but I need to give you this background. They were showing the Sahara Desert, north of
Yes.
Africa. It's a large desert. So they were showing via satellite how the dust from the Sahara, crosses the ocean and goes into parts of Europe.
Mm.
Nobody could imagine this, the dust coming from
Oh.
the Sahara Desert, traveling all the way, transported via, large systems into. So I'm trying to say to you, the fact that you are sitting in Malawi or you're sitting in South Africa, they are actually they are what we call global transports in the atmosphere. Things that can happen in another part of the ocean, but through the weather, the large weather systems, those things can actually affect you even here. So the change of the chemistry of the atmosphere was so large during the industrial revolution did not happen over a short period it happened over generations to develop nations. So the scale therefore of that development and as a result, emissions, the carbon dioxide that was emitted as a result, some of the power stations in Europe had lasted for over 100 years. So they've been churning out this thing, throughout those years. So then you then affect the global weather system. It does not it does not therefore discriminate. It comes at you wherever you are in the world. Even European nations are affected by the same thing that they caused. So basically, all of us now in the world are affected. Maybe others different than the others. Other nations, as I was saying, are poor and they're not in a very good state to then withstand what is coming at them. Hence, as I was saying, in the debate, in the climate change, at these COPs, is usually, at least the voice coming from developing countries or poor countries or least developed countries, is that we need money because we did not cause this thing. So because we did not cause this thing, those of you who caused it must then pay, must pay for it's a real thing. It's not something that countries are whispering. They're actually making a case in these debates. And it's not often, because it would mean that the countries, would have to pay, many nations in the world. And as you can imagine, the global architecture is not structured such that it deals with justice, as it were, because people are saying there ought to be environmental justice. And environmental justice means those who wronged the environment must then pay for it. And we know who they are. And it's and then countries like United States get themselves out of this thing to say, we're getting out of this thing because maybe they don't want to be entangled into these debates, because they feel like they are, as Trump would say, their focus is just on America. We have nothing to do with you. So it's a pity, you know, for countries like Malawi. There are others actually who are literally going to be there are these states that are usually what we call archipelago. These states, like, what do we call them? That are a constellation of islands, and Bahamas and others that are thriving on tourism. Some of their islands are going to be inundated and completely submerged, and it could mean that it's the end of maybe tourism in those places, or end of those countries, as it were, going into the future.
Yeah, that's
And I do not want to paint a gloomy picture here, but I think it's good to sort of get a sense of what's going. I've painted a sort of a global picture. The topic is quite broad, I sort of painted so that you can get a global picture, but there are things that are happening at country level, actions. There are things that are happening at municipal level, at different parts of the world, to try and deal, with some of these difficult situations I've mentioned. I know, for example, I was saying to you, colleagues, we were in India. We were actually going there to learn about how that country, or at least that city, is dealing with extreme heat. And from that visit to India, we are now here in Gauteng, are developing a heat action plan for the province. So the three main cities, Johannesburg, Tshwane, and Ekurhuleni, would then have we actually should be completing that plan by September, October this year. So we then should be able to have a plan, because currently, as it stands, we don't have it. So if there's a debilitating heat wave, we actually have no way. We're not prepared, for example, the same way as a country in a city in India, that city we visited in India is. Those guys know exactly what to do when there's a heat wave. Because they had a heat wave in 2010, and they had to do lots of things thereafter to get themselves to where they are today. We've had heat waves here, and people just feel like it's hot, and drink water, you sit under the shade, and if you've got an aircon, you try and get your aircon on, and the lights. But what if you don't? We have, for example, done studies here across the province to show, if you live in a shack in Gauteng, or any other part of the country, for example, the big thing about heat wave is, as you can imagine, when there's a heat wave and you get into your house and it's at night, and the temperature in your house does not drop at night, you are unable to sleep, because it's just too hot inside your house. You can't open the windows because mosquitoes are going to come in, or you are scared that maybe for your own safety. So there's a dilemma, really, that you have to face with. Imagine a shack. A shack, we've learned that, let's say, inside your house, usually I feel uncomfortable when it's above 25 inside my house at night in summer. It could maybe 26, 27. That's actually quite hot for you that's a hot temperature for anybody to lead for most people to, or at least for those of us who live in these areas, because maybe in some parts 27 could be fine. But if you live in Gauteng, usually 27 degrees nighttime temperature is quite hot. In a shack, you must add 6 to that 27. 27 plus 6. So that's what they're actually stuck with at night. In a shack. So and we've proven this, we have shown this. So we don't know what could be happening to the physiology of those people who live there. Maybe you and I are quite healthy, we can try and mend this thing, but what if you've got an infant? What if you're pregnant? And what if you've got comorbidities, you've got underlying diseases and things like that? So all of these things now we need. So that's what adaptation means. It means now you must understand all of these things and do something about it. Yeah.
Thank you very much. There are many questions that I had in mind. And also, I would have loved that you get into the politics around that. But anyway, because of time, we may not get to that point. But I would want to open the platform for those that may have questions. Just to answer a few questions before we close. Is there anyone with a question? Maybe while we're waiting for those that may have a question, I just want to read this comment It says, eye-opening presentation, insightful. Thank you for your for simplifying a complex subject to understand the times that we live in. That's very true. That's very true. I think the challenge that we're having, especially, I'm not sure of other nations, but the idea of climate change, you just hear it, but you never get to have a chance where you have someone that explains it to you such that you understand at the level of where you are. We really appreciate that. Is there anyone with a question?
Yeah, I think it's two questions. Thank you for the lovely presentation, brother. My first question is, what's the support? Is there much support from the state-owned entities with the climate change or reducing of of having a friendly environment, taking consideration that I think there was a plan for tax impositions on solar systems, right? Being discouraged for households to have their own personal solar systems to be installed, right? And of course, Eskom is a state-owned entity, you know. So, so that's the first question: is how much support is there from the state-owned entities? We see it also, you know, the waters that are being drank, you know, they are contaminated, and the sewage systems, seems like things are getting worse and worse by every year. There's not much improvement when it comes to a clean climate environment. Diseases are forever increasing, and we noticed that actually this whole climate change thing, policies per se, or ideologies have been there for quite some time, but it seems like there's very little or mimic support from the government. Yeah, then my second question, right, is don't you think that you know, some concepts will eventually lead to force, right? Where individuals or society will have to abide, you know, to these policies that would have been implemented, especially from an international law focus, right? So that is my other fear, you know, where as abiding law-abiding citizens, they will need to you know, to confine themselves, you know, to these laws, right? Especially when it comes to climate change, because it's a global movement. And when something is globally driven, you know, citizens have little to say. Can make a good example about the initiation, or rather the enact of vaccines. That was a global movement. And, you know, so I'm just bringing this about that, you know, don't you think that, you know, some laws that will have been discussed, you know, like the Laudate C, you know, we don't know what may come from there, from those, that people will be forced to bind themselves to whatever being planned per se for the sake of climate change or global warming.
Yeah. You're asking difficult, tough questions. Let's see. Yeah, there are no, you know, hard and fast answers to these things, because as I think I try to paint a very complex picture of nations have been talking for 30 years, you know, from 1995 up to, you know, the one that's going to take place now in December or November in Rio. And sometimes they go back. Actually, in between some of these COPs, some COPs have actually collapsed, where countries completely just don't agree, and the whole thing falls apart. And they then decide, okay, we're not agreeing. Let's all go home, and maybe we'll reconvene 6 months or maybe next year. So it's not to say, throughout these COPs, things have always been, plain sailing. Countries have been disagreeing and promises have not been met and the like. But maybe to the question on whether SOEs are supportive of this thing, I think organizations like ESCOM probably could be finding themselves between a rock and a hard place, in the sense that they, and maybe you and I as well, because we are dependent entirely on ESCOM for energy. So if ESCOM, for all intents and purposes, closes, as it sort of tried to do when we had load shedding, because basically what happened the time that we're having the most debilitating load shedding, it was because we suddenly as a country neglected the what is we neglected the to look after this machine called ESCOM, and then we didn't have electricity as a country. So it's really it's a tough one even for us. But they, actually, interestingly enough, they when I go to many of these climate change discussions across the country, nationally, everywhere, ESCOM is usually in the room, and they are in agreement with what's being said. It's such that the nature of their business is coal. So what can they do? They can agree, but you are stuck with this thing. And also we are stuck as a country as well with having to use coal. On the issue of them, even municipalities, trying to put some kind of, if you like, levy or a fee for your solar system. It's actually quite interesting, because the economies of these things are also linked, to basically the economy that we would have would be linked to coal. So the business models that we would have are sort of aligned in that way. If a municipality, for example, the big municipalities, they buy electricity from ESCOM, like the rates that you pay to, let's say, City of Johannesburg, City of Tshwane, etc., those monies would go and buy electricity from ESCOM, electricity that would have been from coal. So the municipality would then expect of you, to also, when you buy electricity here where I live in Tshwane, money goes to the municipality as well. So the municipalities are making a lot of money out of electricity. So if you now are introducing a solar system on top of your house, it means some of the money or all of the money is not going to the municipality. So then it changes the picture or the financing model of a municipality. So the municipality becomes bankrupt, or it's not able to make ends meet. You talked about, for example, things sort of going awry in terms of wastewater systems and infrastructure. It's because we are not, as a country, investing into those things, and then you are seeing degradation, or over time. So there are all of these systems, economic systems, that are also interwoven into the economy of trying to, what we call decarbonization. In other words, when you're changing from using carbon or using coal to changing cleaner energy. In other words, you want to change to solar, or want to change to wind. Actually, there are interesting debates taking place right now in Europe because Europeans have had these very high ambitions of reduction of these gases, and as a result, countries like Germany have moved towards renewable energy, wind, etc., and solar. But Germany is quite industrialized country. It builds cars, and it's a big economy in Europe. And then there was a war in Ukraine, and they were using a lot of gas from Ukraine, these Europeans. So suddenly they had to go elsewhere to look for, alternatives. But then it turns out actually that from the debates we're hearing that them not having that, access to that gas from Ukraine, the economies now in Germany are struggling and to drive the kind of heavy industry that they need. So you even though you are going to change the energy, from coal or what we call fossil fuel, you're gonna have to try and find a balancing act in terms of what kind of energy you're gonna use to drive heavy industry. In South Africa, for example, we've got very high levels of poverty. So for you to be able to eradicate poverty, you need to have an economy that is really, really, that is working. In other words, you must have a lot of energy. The question is, where are you going to get that energy? Must build things, manufacture things that can be bought, and then you drive the economy. China is doing exactly that. They are not listening to anyone. They're just, chaining out greenhouse gas emissions, carbon, like it's out of fashion because they are saying we're a large country, close to 1.4, 1.2 billion people. Many people here are poor. So we are just going to do what we think or what we want, and what we believe is right. So there's an economy, and then there's having to deal with climate change. And countries sometimes then, in as much as they all sit together and agree on these lofty ideas of Paris agreements and things like that, they also have got vested interest or selfish interests, if you like, to say, here in this country, we've got big problems. Yes, we are hearing what you are saying, but we think we need to do this thing first. So it's a it's quite it's quite murky. It's not a clear story. I don't know, the letters I'd mentioned, from the Catholic Church and other things like that. Of course, those are not necessarily, codified in law, but they are sort of advocacy tools to try and encourage action across various sectors, across governments. Usually when the Pope speaks, people tend to listen, usually those maybe from the Catholic Church, but also maybe others outside the Catholic Church tend to listen. So those are used. Something that happened quite recently, maybe closer to what you've just, there's a ruling that came from the International Court of Justice. This the very same court that South Africa took Israel to. The court had made a ruling, which seeks to suggest that there may well into the future be strong cases that can be made about countries that are not wanting to abide by the Paris Agreement or the UNFCCC, such that maybe like South Africa had done with the case of Israel, to say, for purposes of climate change, to say a country like the United States of America is not allowed to get out of the Paris Agreement. If it does get out, then there should be punishment to that country. So the kinds of obligations at the level of climate change, at least as things stand, are to nations. So not so much to individuals per se, where you as a person, such a decision will only be taken, and I don't think it can be permissible in South Africa anyway, where you certain things are compelled for you to do. People tend to be, the constitution here tends to be quite, liberal, such that you are not, often feel that you are compelled to do things that you actually do not like. If you don't like those things, you usually would then go and challenge them. But you can also, as an individual, take the country to court, or in this case, the president to court or a minister for not abiding by, let's say the Climate Change Act. Or you say the mayor of Johannesburg is obligated by the Climate Change Act to do ABC. He's not doing that, and therefore I am taking him to court for not having done so. So that's what I think is likely to happen. In Durban, if you recall, there were floods there in 2022, thereabout. big ones. Toyota, the car manufacturer, is taking the city of eThekwini to court because it says it did not do what it was supposed to have done to prevent flooding. And as a result, Toyota as a company lost out. So it's actually going to be an interesting case. If Toyota wins in that case, it opens the floodgates for many government institutions when it comes to climate change, such that if people are incurring damages, you can be an individual and incur damage. You say, you know, the heat wave has done this, flooding has done this to me. I'm taking you to court if you can show that the government has neglected its responsibility, or a company has neglected its responsibility, towards you, maybe causing flooding and this and that. So there's that opportunity coming into the future.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to discuss on this thing, and I wish we can have another time, but we'll see how the program works out. We will communicate. But I greatly appreciate the opportunity that you've given us to really listen to you explaining these things to us. I have one last question that I wanted to ask, but then I'm looking at the time. It does not allow me to ask the question, and there are also two more questions that I saw in the comment box. One says there are those who say it is a hoax. Why do they doubt? I think that's what you wanted to say. I'm sure you may have heard those.
Yeah. Yes, there isn't that much here in South Africa, to be honest with you. This tends to be quite louder in countries like the US. I've been to the US, but just for less than a week, so I don't quite understand, But it's I've learned something and this was the case as well during I think the previous speaker talked about the vaccines and COVID. There was a lot of confusion, if you like, around COVID and lots of stories and others thinking that this thing is all a hoax. So so there's that too, within the climate change space where others are like, no. This thing is a hoax. But I had said there is the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It produces reports those reports come after every 5 years, 5 to 7 years, what they're about. As I said, the first one was in 1990. So the next one would have been 5-7 years after that. The other one is now we're on the 6th, with the last one that came out about 2 years or so ago was the 6th report. And it's not just one report. In one tranche of the release, there would be 2, 4, 5, 6 reports that are dealing with a lot of issues. And that would have covered the state of science over the last 5 years or 6 or 7 years on climate change globally. And the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change doesn't itself do science. All it does, it looks across the world. Who is doing science on climate change? What are they saying? And consolidate this. That's why they call their reports assessment reports. They have assessed science across the world. And that science would have been done by top scientists all over the world. They would run models to show. Remember that Earth observation system I showed you, where there are stations across the world, there are satellites, there are all of these things. All of those things are then distilled in very sophisticated labs across the world. America actually has some of the best scientists who are in the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate. American scientists. Actually, I think the majority of scientists in the IPCC are from the US. So scientists from the USA itself are saying this thing is real. So what tends to happen, actually, the politics then end up taking over, what is sort of, if you like, objective science. And then the waters get muddied. So then, people then end up taking what's there and then running with it. During COVID, I was reading mostly from the scientific journals and to get a sense of what's going on. And then you read elsewhere in the media, you are getting different stories. So actually, medical or people in the medicine space have always known that things like COVID can crop up at any time. So when it did happen for them, it's not a surprise because they deal with these things from scientific basis all the time. So some people believe science in general, some people don't. It's a disposition based on how we learn, and how we view the world. So sometimes in South Africa, luckily, we don't have a problem of denialism around climate change. In general, people are aligned, but it's possible that people could disagree. I worked just to give you an example. I worked at the Weather Service between 2002 and 2010, and there's something that they used to do at the South African Weather Service before my time, during, if you like, the apartheid era. You may have heard of something called cloud seeding. If you have not heard, I'll just give a short explanation. Basically, there's chemistry in the atmosphere. So there are gases and the like. So these scientists at the South African Weather Service then were studying this chemistry of the atmosphere. And the question they would ask themselves is, how does the rain form? So because the formation of rain is basically just chemistry and physics of the atmosphere. So they're studying this thing to say, okay, you need clouds to form, and what types of clouds must they form? What environments would lead to a cloud formation? And then eventually you have rain. And how much rain can you then get? So then in their studies, then they would sort of say, okay, a cloud forms and no rain comes. So and the question, why is it not raining? And and then they would say, okay, let's catalyze this cloud. Basically, let's throw in a catalyst into this cloud. It's like you're having a dough and you put yeast and then it rises. That kind of. So you sort of in the cloud, you fly into this cloud with a small aircraft. You put yeast into it, as it were, and you see whether it's not going to produce rain and how much of this rain is going to come. Basically, that's what cloud seeding is. So you drop seeds in the cloud, and then let the cloud, and hopefully rain will come out of that. And yet, when that experiment was happening, it was actually happening around some farms in the Free State and Mpumalanga. The farmers in those areas were up in arms, and they were having all sorts of stories about these kinds of experiments causing drought and this and the other, and so, and as a result, that it sort of created an urban legend around cloud seeding, as though it's just a hoax. It's not, and as if it's not a science. When in fact, actually, you can read about it. The scientists who were involved there have written about what they were doing, and they're not hiding themselves. And of course, they're no longer doing that because you pay for these things and then you realize maybe it's not worth it. But guess what? Those scientists were in fact contracted by countries in the Middle East, countries like Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, in Dubai, and the like, because it's deserts there, so they want rain. So they call these scientists to say, "Come and make things happen here," you know. So these, but those experiments were sort of associated with if you like, witchcraft and the ideas of hoax were also coming in. So it just depends on how we how prepared are we to read more and sort of understanding these things. Otherwise, if we probably just scratch the surface, we may end up having all of these ideas of hoax sinking into our minds.
Brother Mzwis, we really appreciate your time. We are blessed. We have learned a lot and still much more to learn. We still have to go and read more in this subject, but at least now we understand where to start and how to go about the studies. So we really appreciate your time. Thank you very much once again. May the Lord bless you and keep your family.
Thank you. No
Um,
problem. Anytime. I can make myself available.
Yeah, we'll definitely talk. Probably, I think if we do happen to have a next session sometime soon, it'll be more question and answer and discussion. Obviously, we would have gone back and rewrite these things just to get a clearer understanding on these things. Probably look at what are the other objections that people are bringing forward in
Yeah.
regards to the subject. So at least we can have a solid understanding of this thing. We really appreciate your time. It's something that we've been hearing about, but there was never a time where one could get a clear understanding of what climate change is and what are the plans around that, what are the countries doing about it. We really appreciate that. It helps us to actually relook at it and see where do we fit in all this. And also, this was going to be my last question, but I'll just throw it. You don't have to answer it. My concern as we are presenting, especially with these meetings that are being held, conferences that are being held, and there's someone signing on behalf of the country, but you don't get to have such discussions brought to the ground where we can then say, you know what, you can go and sign in our behalf. It really is a concerning situation.
We can talk about that. I've got an answer for that. We can talk about that next time.
Yeah. Thank you very much. May the Lord bless you and keep you.
Thank you. No, cheers. Cheers, colleagues.
Thank you. We'll close in prayer. Shall we close our eyes? Our kind and loving Father, I want to thank you for the opportunity that you've given us. For Father, you have said that people perish because of lack of knowledge. You have made it possible that we hear and understand what is currently happening. There are so many questions that still remains, but Father, we thank you for what we have done so far. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll talk.
Bye.